Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the evening program of the Viktor Frankl Institute of South Africa's Congress. Teria and guests, welcome so much, and thank you for all of your presence. We look forward to sharing some thoughts with you. Teria, it's a privilege for me that you've asked me to say a few words, so thank you very much for that. And in typical Teria style, when I asked Teria what should I talk about, she says, you need to talk about what's on your heart. And so that's always the most difficult thing. Eh? It's like when Winston Churchill they said to him, at short notice, dear sir, can you come and speak to us for 5 minutes? He said, I can't do that at short notice. And then they said, and he said, how long notice do you need? He says, for a 5-minute speech, I'll probably need about 3 to 6 months preparation for a 5-minute speech. He says, because in 5 minutes, you've got to make sense. If you ask me to talk for half an hour, I can come and talk to you now. And that is important. So I had to think about what is the real things that we want to talk about. And the real thing that I want to talk about tonight is that autopilot in life is not an option.
Okay. Yes, I'd like to look at his face anyway. I don't like anybody's back. I came to have face-to-face interactions with everyone.
And my apologies to the people around the corner that can't see me, but right. So only in a few minutes, what I'd like to talk about is that autopilot in life really isn't an option. And I won't talk about planes again. I first want to say thank you to everybody that made this possible, and thank you for everybody that keeps the Viktor Frankl Institute of South Africa alive. And I know of the people around here, I've hardly met probably 10. But that is amazing. That is really amazing for us to see that the Viktor Frankl Institute of South Africa is alive and well and is doing well as well. And Sean will talk to us a bit later about that and logotherapy of the future. So logotherapy is nearly 100 years old. And when we think about what life asks of us, I'm so glad that life asked of the people in this room that to take the message of logotherapy further on the planet. So at the Viktor Frankl Institute, we are committed to sharing and promoting the practice of logotherapeutic principles and strongly believe that Viktor Frankl's philosophy can improve the lives of all people. Now, as all visions say, it's actually about what we do. It's about the improvement of lives of all people. So if we talk about Viktor Frankl's philosophy, then first of all, we need to understand what is Viktor Frankl's philosophy. Because if we don't know what Viktor Frankl's philosophy is, then we can't live that out. So let us stop at the three things which I'm sure we all know and remind ourselves about them. It's basically by doing a deed. We discover our meaning in life in 3 different ways: by doing a deed, experiencing a value, and by suffering. Now, we all know that as the creational, the experiential, and the attitudinal values of life. But what always struck me in my personal life, because as you all know, logotherapy is an immensely personal journey. And what struck me about logotherapy is actually not the third one. It is the creational and experiential values and how you have to create and experience things through the third value of suffering for you to get the meaning in whatever the meaning for your personal life is. So, shouldn't go back, should go forward. Is life really only about suffering? I think, Teria, you answered that question for us very well today. We all have suffering in our lives. whatever form it will take. It may be the extreme form, like in the Holocaust, but whatever you have as suffering is termed suffering in your life, whatever that may be. It may be, you all can think of the personal things that you're suffering with. And that is suffering. You don't necessarily need to face death tomorrow morning, because we all suffer with this inner voice in our head. Terry, you said this morning that whenever we talk to one another, there's always a third person in the room. Some may call it God, some may call it consciousness, but there's always in your head something that wants you to be something different. In most cases, something better. That's the good news. Unless you have psychopathology. And that is, in itself, a form of suffering. Because you may feel not good enough, you may not feel successful enough, you may not, there's so many things that you may feel. When we share our life stories, there are stories that's uniquely personal and individually to you. And therefore we are all suffering, whether we're in a concentration camp or not. But it's from that suffering that leads us to the creational and the experiential values. And that is why it's called life is not an autopilot. Because that suffering happens for a reason. It happens because it calls you. It tells you, be that person, the third person in the room, the one in your head, the nous, the soul. It's that person inside you. We are all created exceptionally good. But how do you actually realize that? And I'd like us to talk about a life of intent. Because once you listen to that voice of suffering, I think you then put it over into a life of intent. Otherwise, you're living out of a life of habit. Now, I hate it when speakers put other speakers on YouTube because they didn't know what to say themselves, but I'm actually going to do that, so please forgive me for a minute, because then you'll get the point, I hope.
To defy all of the assumptions. For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet, they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight? The Wright brothers beat them to it. There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery. And this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operated it.
So, we can listen to the whole speech of Simon Sinek, but the moral of the story is that life is actually a life of intent. How is it that Apple does that? How is it that the Wright brothers do that? How is it that we actually are called to the meaning that we are imbuing in our own lives? So I'd like to tell you, as we've done today, a little anecdote from my own life, which really stopped me to think about things. And it happened only about a month or two ago. So I was traveling down to Stellenbosch with my daughter, and we had to stay over in Beaufort West. And we stayed in a lovely little farmhouse, because I love staying outside of town and everywhere. And creepy crawlies everywhere. Now, when we got into the house, it wasn't a scorpion, but it was a large, ugly beast, okay? in the house. And the large ugly beast was running around everywhere, and my daughter really wanted me to kill it. So I tried to catch it. I tried to shove it out the house, but it was just too fast. Anyway, we went to sleep, or we tried to anyway. It ran upstairs and it went into a corner. And I said to her, don't worry, we'll sleep. At about 2 o'clock that morning, there it is, just takes a while. About 2 o'clock that morning, she was shouting, "Oh!" And we looked, and whatever it was, it's not a scorpion, I know that, had stung her on her back. Don't worry, it's not that bad. And I got up, and I said to her, what happened? She says, we called him Sam. She says, Sam is in my bed. I said, no, man, Sam's up there. So anyway, we got away, we found, and Sam was actually in her bed, okay, and he did sting her. But the punchline's coming in a moment, because I actually took my plucky and I killed it. And didn't think too much of it at the time, apart from feeling bad. And then, about 2 weeks after that, when he came back, and I was still thinking about it. Why did I kill it? Why did I kill it? Why did I kill it? Why did I not try and put it out again once, or even move to another room, or why did I kill it? And I couldn't answer that question to myself. And then we saw the movie once, A Hidden Life, which was about a soldier, or not a soldier, he was a peasant in Austria, that refused to sign the allegiance to Hitler. And they gave him 20 chances of signing, because he said he won't sign the allegiance to Hitler. So they put him in jail. Then they said to him, look, you can go back to your farm, sign the allegiance to Hitler. And he still wouldn't. Long story short, eventually, the day before he was actually killed, before he was executed because he wouldn't sign the allegiance to Hitler, they again put a piece of paper before him and he said, sign the allegiance to Hitler. And he didn't. And he knew that his wife would be without a husband. His children, he had small children, would be without a husband forever. There's no coming back. He still didn't sign. And all he had to do, because it was clearly close to the end of the war, is sign the piece of paper and he could go back to being a peasant in Austria. Because they said to him, if we take you to war, we'll even be nice enough to say you can work in the medical corps. He didn't sign the allegiance to Hitler. And that to me brought me back to my thought about why did I kill that, let's call it a scorpion, although it wasn't. Because at the first sign that my daughter may be in danger or I may be inconvenienced or whatever, I forgot about my values. At the first sign, that's how shallow to me my values were. And I think these life lessons that you think takes to you, would you, for your values, would you do what he has done? Or will you, when the scorpion stings your daughter, will you kill it? If it's against your principle to kill anything that lives. I think that's a question that I'd like to, I've been struggling with that immensely, is what is the value of values? And that's a question I think that says it's a long road. That's why it says the long road at the top. It's a long road because the scorpions will come along your way. And you may kill one or two here and there. And then you'll stop and you ask, am I traveling the long road? Am I traveling a life out of habit? Or am I really traveling it out of intent? Who's heard of Irene Dunn? I'm so glad nobody has. Because neither have I, and that's the whole point.
What was the question?
Have you heard of Irene Dunn?
She is a wonderful actress.
Wonderful, there you go.
100 years like me.
Has anybody else heard of Irene Dunn? Do you see that in this audience, one person has heard of Irene Dunne. Would you tell us who Irene Dunne was?
Well, the only thing I remember about her is that I enjoyed her acting, and I think she was a blonde, not as beautiful as a blonde. And I don't remember what film I saw, and I remember that my late mother loved Irene Dunne. And anyone that my mother loved was
You loved.
okay in my book.
Let's hear if this machine would play. Who was Irene Dunne?
The movie world is mourning the passing of a name that spelled magic in the 30s. Irene Dunne, actress, singer, and comedian, is dead at the age of 88. Irene Dunne was one of Hollywood's classiest leading ladies. She was a trained singer hailing from Kentucky. A chance meeting in an elevator with
She wasn't a blonde.
producer Florence Ziegfeld led to stage and screen roles in the legendary Showboat. Dunne had the rare ability among star actresses of being able to excel in musicals, dramas, and comedies. She threw Hollywood and fans a curve when she was able to leave soap operas behind and star in two mid-30s screwball classics, Theodora Goes Wild and The Awful Truth, the latter a smash hit opposite Cary Grant.
In a half an hour, we'll no longer be Mr. and Mrs.
If you didn't feel the way you do, things wouldn't be the way they are, would they? I mean, things could be the same if things were different.
Dunne received 5 Oscar nominations, but never
5
won.
Oscar
Ranging
nominations.
From the early talkie epic Cimarron to her memorable matriarch in I Remember Mama. More than anything, Irene Dunne was a leading lady with regal bearing, usually playing noble but never stuffy, and with acting and singing talents that pleased millions of people until her voluntary retirement in the 1950s. Irene Dunne played important roles off-camera as well. She was often a delegate to Republican national conventions and was appointed by President Dwight Eisenhower to replace Eleanor Roosevelt as a special envoy to the United Nations.
Now we all know who Irene Dunne was for Trivial Pursuit next time. But for all of us around in this room tonight, it's a Trivial Pursuit question. Who was Irene Dunne? Clearly she was very famous, but within 40, 50 years of her death, no one knows who Irene Dunne was. And how did I come across Irene Dunne? I didn't. It was by chance. I went through famous actresses that I've never heard of when I was thinking of tonight. And up comes the name of Irene Dunne. Very famous, Oscar nominated, Republican person, you know, she stood for the Republican Party. And to your point of earlier, Teria, Irene Dunne to the world is forgotten. You can go and Google her. That's all it is. It's Google. And it's an immense thing to realize this mortality that we sit with, this thing called mortality. The importance of what we do, even if you have 5 Oscars, you are beautiful. You are a Republican Party senator. You will be forgotten in a very, very few years. But for one thing, and that is the meaning that you imbued in your own life. Irene Dunne's meaning and her life had immense importance to Irene Dunne. And the life that she lived as intent, because she clearly lived a life of intent. She didn't sit around under a tree. She did many things. And that life of intent had meaning to Irene Dunne. But 100 years later, we've all forgotten it. It is the Sartre principle of staring into that abyss and looking into the abyss joyfully to say we will go down the same abyss as Irene Dunn has gone. Whether we're rich, whether we're poor, whether we're sick, whether we're healthy, whether we live to be 100 or whether we live to be 50. We will go down that abyss. And then you need to ask yourself, do I celebrate my life? Do I celebrate my life? Do I celebrate this that I am? That I am important? Do I joyfully look down that abyss and say, here I stand, ecce homo, look at me. I am important. Just before I go down that abyss, I will make a difference. Do I live by habit or intent? Do I think before I kill the scorpion? Or is it just convenient to kill the scorpion because then we can go back to bed and all sleep nicely for the rest of the night? But more importantly, do I celebrate the lives of others as well? Do I say to you that you are important? You are important because you are important. You'll go down the abyss, so will you. So will you, Sean. We'll go down that abyss, my friend. But you are important. And do we celebrate that? Your name. Who? You can put your name in here. 30 years from now, someone will stand in a room and say, Izak Maree, who? It will happen. Therefore, Izak Maree needs to live his life with intent. And if it's his value not to kill scorpions, then bloody hell, you shouldn't kill scorpions. Thank you for the fantastic work that you all do, and that you are important on this planet, and that you have values, and that you think about those values, because if you didn't, you wouldn't sit here tonight. And let's take that message out into the planet, that you are important, because you're the one that can make a difference. Firstly, and most importantly, in your own life, by not living a life of habit. You have to live a life of intent. Thank you so much for sharing the little time with me. I appreciate that. Teria, good luck.